Hello friends, this is Vaibhav Purandare here and my new video is about whether India has abandoned Russia, its longtime ally, and whether India has taken a sudden U-turn on the Russia versus Ukraine conflict. This discussion on whether India has abandoned Russia suddenly began soon after India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his conversation with the Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's meeting in Samarkand in September 2022 said while addressing the Russian president that today is not the era of war. This was supposed to be a direct comment, a direct criticism of Russia's actions in Ukraine. And talk began that India was finally abandoning Russia and that India had taken a U-turn. India had effected some sort of turnaround. But what's the truth about this? Friends, we are going to discuss the truth here and India's real position as far as this conflict is concerned. The Western nations and the Western bloc, they have accused India of not condemning Russia. For months they have accused India of not condemning Russia on the issue. And India for its part has said that it is taking its own approach to the question, which is nuanced. So what's the truth? Let's go to the start of the war in February 2022. Russia begins its attack on Ukraine and India issues its first statement on the conflict. What is this first statement? This first statement is both sides should follow the path of negotiations and diplomacy. By giving up the path of negotiations, dialogue and diplomacy, who has invaded Ukraine? It is Russia. And India's statement is stick to the path of dialogue, diplomacy and negotiations. So who is it aimed at? It's aimed at Russia. India's statement again on the issue immediately is that the sovereignty of independent nation states has to be maintained and should not be violated. Who has violated an independent nation state's sovereignty? Russia has, by invading Ukraine. Ukraine hasn't invaded Russia. Russia has done that. So who is this statement aimed at? This statement is, like the previous statement, aimed at Russia. Both these statements, right at the beginning of the war, are implicit criticisms of Russia and Russia's actions in Ukraine. Yes, we do have resolutions that were passed in the United Nations after that. There were 4 places where India abstained itself: in the UN Security Council, in the UN General Assembly, in the Human Rights Council, and also where the vote in the International Atomic Energy Agency was concerned. So India abstained itself. Again here, there's an abstention. There's not a vote in Russia's favor. Then what happens? Then we come to June 2022. And there are reports that there has been a massacre of civilians in Bucha during the war. What is India's statement on the war? Reports are of a massacre and there is a big demand for an independent investigation into whether civilians were killed during the war in that particular area. So what does India say? India unequivocally condemns the killing of civilians and supports the case for an independent investigation into the killings. Who has allegedly killed the civilians? The Russians. What's the demand for an investigation? President Volodymyr Zelensky wants to address the United Nations via video. What is India's stand on whether Zelensky should address the UN via video or not? India supports the case that Zelensky should be allowed to address the UN via video. Who is this aimed against? It is aimed against Russia. And then comes September 2022, when Narendra Modi, during his meeting with Russian President Putin, says today's era is not the era of war. So has India taken a sudden U-turn? Friends, it's absolutely clear from the stand taken by India right through this conflict that India began by indirectly criticizing Russia for its actions in Ukraine and has now gone on to openly criticizing Russia for its actions in Ukraine. Because the manner in which the war has gone has made things extremely difficult for the world in terms of food and fuel security, and India has stated this openly in all its official statements. Yes, it's a fact that India bought a lot of oil from Russia during this conflict, and India said that it was buying it in unprecedented amounts because of the deep discounts that Russia was offering for its oil. And these discounts would help India, and the supply would help India to meet its food, fuel and fertilizer requirements, which is what India has been focusing on, the world's food, fuel and fertilizer supplies and requirements, which have been badly hit by this conflict. India has also argued, while defending its purchase of Russian oil, that Europe and the West have continued to buy gas from Russia all through this conflict. Whereas the West has imposed a number of sanctions on Russia, these sanctions have been somewhat selective and only related to certain things, while the purchase of gas has continued. So India has argued that the West is not in a position to offer any moral lectures to India on this subject. What we can see is that India has gradually shifted its stand by beginning with an indirect criticism of Russia and going to a direct criticism of Russia. What this is suggesting, friends, is very clear. It is that India is declaring to the world that it will not toe somebody's line. It will not toe the line of the West because the West wants it to do something, but it will take actions which are in its own self-interest. At the same time, it will point out and condemn things and criticize where it believes things are going completely wrong. So has the India-Russia relationship changed? Yes, it has, definitely. But that change happened some time ago, and the change is evident even in the responses that India has made. But there's no U-turn. India's statements at the start of the war are not inconsistent with India's statements now in September 22. And India's statements have remained pretty much similar right through the conflict and are likely to remain so. In fact, the moment Putin declared that he was going to conscript the Russian population, and the moment he gave an indirect nuclear threat, India again made it clear that this was not the time for war, but that Russia and Ukraine must work out a deal for peace. And India has consistently pushed for a dialogue, a direct dialogue between the Russian President Putin and the Ukrainian President Zelensky. So there's no U-turn. India is acting in its self-interest, and India's line can be seen to be consistent during the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Thank you, dear friends. This was my latest video. If you liked it, and if you still haven't subscribed to my channel, do subscribe to my channel and also press the bell button so that every time a new video is uploaded, you will get an alert on it. Thank you so much, and see you soon.